Good evening, everybody. My name is Raywin. I will be your MC for this evening. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge Your Excellency Ambassador Tangata, Ambassador of Japan, and members of the Diplomatic Corps, and Mayor Ray Wallace from Lower Hutt. Thank you for coming. And everybody else, invited guests, also thank you for coming to Korero 2017 Wellington edition. First of all, I'd like to hand over to Kura Moiho to mihi us in.
Ara te taku te tira atura ki tōku maungo ahu maurangi tūtau I te pō. I cast my eye on my ancestral mountain known as Ahumairangi. Kia wakarongorongo atura ki te iere ngā ripu ngā wai tukukiri, ngā wai ripuripu e wanga atura ki rungo ki roto Pipitea. From the sources of this mountain of Ahumairangi comes the streams in which my ancestors sustained themselves, known as Pipitea. I wā kanakana atura ki te wanga nui ātara, e wanga mo tātou, te mārea e utaina mai rā ki roti te wanga nei. And that goes out into the harbour, the great harbour of Tara, in which over the many years, many people have entered it. Nō reira, kei ngā kao, kei ngā māngai kā wanatanga, kei ngā rangatiro tā wā I nei rā te mihi, to our distinguished guests, Your Excellency, and those from overseas know my haramai welcome. Te tuarua mihi rawa atura ki te poari a te upoko tuatahi, a horomi, me te upoko tuarua, Your Worship, Ray Wallace. I'd like to acknowledge the board, also the President and the Vice President o tēnei rā o sister cities. Nō reira, tēnei te whakaahua, tēnei he uri tēnei o te raukura, he uri tēnei o te atiawa, me ngā iwi o Taranaki Wānui e no o nei nā ki roti te Whenua. I stand here as a descendant and as a spokesperson on behalf of our people te atiawa and of the many tribes of Taranaki Whānui that are located here. Nō reira nau mai haramai ki te tautoko te kaupapa o te rangi nei. Welcome to this occasion here and what we have gathered for. He oi anō. Huri atu taku wakaro ki a rātau kua numi atura ki tua wakarere. But I'd like to acknowledge and cast my mind back to those before me who have now gone into the spirit world. Nō reira, a rātau I te ao wairua, mā kere mai ana te koro wai aroha ki rungi a tātou I tēnei ia I pō. To you we ask that you shelter the cloak of aroha, of love, over us gathered here this evening. Nō reira koutou te pō tātou te ao awatea te nā koutou. So to you, to the spirit world, we acknowledge you, but also we acknowledge us here today. O te anō rā me ki te kaupapa. Nau mai haramai kai ngā ki are mai o koutou tāringa, ki te wakaronga atura ki te tēpu nei. And ask that those who have gathered here, that we listen intently to the tēpu here, those that have come to talk before us. Nō reira e te tēpu. Nei rā te mi haramai rā koutou o koutou puki ngā kōrero o matauraura kōrero, I mui te aroaro o te mārea nei. And acknowledge your expertise and your knowledge, diverse knowledge, to share before all of us. Hoi anō ka hoki atu au ki tēnei wakatau ki kōrero, nā tā he mihenare tōna kōrero. I'd just like to quote a proverb that was quoted before the Waitangi Tribunal in 1985. It goes something like this. Ko te reo te Māori o te mana Māori, ko te kupu te Māori o te reo Māori. And it's saying the life essence of a language emanates one's being. Nō reira kia koutou e ngā iwi take, noko nei, noko nā, noko rā, ko tō reo te Māori o tō ake mana Māori. And that your language is your essence. O kia turā ki tēnei kupu kōrero, he aha tēnei te wakamārama o te kupu Māori. he ngā ware noi ho tērā kia. What is the true essence of being Māori? Its definition is being normal. Ko rā tāhuatanga te kupu Māori about being normal. Nō reira kia koutou e ngā rauranga tira mā, tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou katoa. Te aroha, te whakapono, me te rangi Māori e, tātou e. Although the composer of that particular waiata was a gentleman known as Morven Simons, and he wrote that song particularly at a volatile time in Wanganui, at the time of Pākaitori. And it's about bringing people together. It talks about through love, through faith, and through hope and peace, we will achieve, we will unite. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora kura, thank you very much. Now I'd like Wen Powells to say a few words from the Office of Ethnic Communities.
Thank you very much, Rewen. Enga mana, enga rio, enga hau e wha. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Wen Powells ahau, ko te tumuaki o te tari matawaka. I am Wen Powells and I'm the Director of the Office of Ethnic Communities. And I want to thank all of you for inviting myself and my colleague Alan Edwards from the Office of Ethnic Communities here. And I want to greet in particular the leadership of Sister Cities New Zealand, Your Excellencies, Your Worship, Councillor, and the speakers who are going to talk on 3 wonderful topics to do with ethnic diversity in New Zealand. The Office of Ethnic Communities, of course, works to promote the values of diversity in New Zealand. The event is also sponsored by our Ethnic Communities Development Fund, and I think this is a wonderful example of diversity and inclusion in our society. Korero Wellington 2017 will be featuring some fine speakers, so Alicia, Haimona, Michael, Nazra, Pakiza, and Sonia. I hope I haven't left anyone out. I'm interested also to see that in your forward planning at Sister Cities New Zealand, that you have a theme of connecting globally through technology for the Sister Cities New Zealand Conference 2018 in May next year, and that you have a youth tour next year to China. That seems to me to be an exciting educational and cultural experience that would inspire young Kiwis to be global citizens. So I wish you all a very successful evening of Korero. And once again, on behalf of the Office of Ethnic Communities, congratulations to Sister Cities New Zealand for your ongoing wonderful work connecting Kiwis across cities and globally. Thank you very much. Kia ora.
Thank you, Wen. Now I'd like to hand over to Marcus Boshier, the Youth Director for Sister Cities New Zealand, who will be facilitating our discussion tonight. Cheers, thank you. I'll be back later.
Wonderful, thank you very much, Rewen. Unfortunately, I've got a bit of a cold, but fortunately we've got 6 wonderfully talented people to take over most of the role of talking and discussing issues with you tonight. So what I might do is just give them each a brief introduction. If they have anything to add to that, then we'd welcome that. We'll talk for about 45 minutes or thereabouts, and then we'll open it up to questions from the floor. So if there's anything that you would like to ask, then perhaps just make a note of that. And there will be, and we'll make sure there is an opportunity to ask those questions at the end of 45 minutes of, hopefully, robust discussion. So firstly, from me, thank you very, very much to all the speakers for turning up. And from the far right, We have Sonia Giles, who is involved with the Victoria International Leadership Program, and we thank Amber for connecting us with Sonia. As with all of the panellists, they come with a vast amount of experience. Sonia is in her final year of her Law and Science degree at Victoria, has a focus on environmental law and climate science, is a legal research assistant, is involved with UN Youth Generation Zero, the Global Enterprise Experience, which is a fantastic initiative run through Victoria, is passionate about justice and the environment, and is also the Wellington Schools Director at Savvy. Then we have Michael, who is involved with the JET program and is a current secretary with the Alumni Association. He's a teacher in commerce in the Commerce Department at Wellington East Girls College, has a Bachelor of Arts in Economics in Japanese, and is involved in teaching Japanese, or was involved in teaching Japanese at the Japanese Embassy. Nazra came to New Zealand in 2007 as the Vice President of the National Refugee Youth Council, so brings with her a tremendous amount of experience in that space, is studying political science and international relations at Vic, and is, perhaps unsurprisingly but very pleasingly, passionate about diversity and empowering young people. Pakiza, and this will only touch on some of her tremendous qualities, but graduated in law as a consultant legal advisor, solicitor, a board member of a number of organisations, has a particular interest in human rights, diversity and inclusion. Haimona, and we might get you to expand on some of your experience, but as a consultant, supervision training at Tukaha, which is involved heavily in the organisation and coordination of the Tuia initiative with mayors throughout the country, and I suppose providing opportunities for rangatahi to give back to their communities and to develop leadership qualities. So wonderful work, and Haimona's come to us from outside Wellington as well, so thank you very much for your time. And so in addition to that, he's involved with Māori recruitment at Waikato University. And lastly, we have Alicia, who I've had the sort of pleasure and I'd sort of been in awe, I suppose, at what she's achieved through her involvement with the Sister Cities Youth Subcommittee as one of the two coordinators for the youth tour to China. So if you're interested in that, then Alicia might be able to expand on that later. As a content development manager at LexisNexis, and also involved in the Successor Generation Initiative, as well as the Asian New Zealand Foundation Leadership Network. So is there anything that any of you would like to add, or should we get into the questions? We'll get into the questions. So one of the things that both Wen and Kura touched on was, I suppose, the importance of language, and there's to that there's the question of identity. And the first question that we were going to pose to the panel, and it's got a number of parts to it, is that language is key to understanding people from different countries, cultures, ethnicities. So do you, the panel, think that a second language should be compulsory to be learnt in our schools? If so, how do we set that language? And do you feel as though it's fair to learn another language and about another culture, perhaps without first learning about your own? And Sonia, should we?
Should I start? Yeah. Should I use this or? Yes? Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Sonia. Okay, to answer the question, I think that it should be compulsory, absolutely. As far as I'm concerned, it's pretty much a no-brainer, not simply because of the cultural intelligence that you learn when you study a language, but also because it's proven to increase connections in your brain in the same way that music does. So it's useful in all sorts of things. As for setting what languages are available, the argument that often comes out against having a compulsory second language is that there aren't teachers available. Of course, it's difficult.
I would be the first to recognise that there is an enormous shortage of language teachers in New Zealand, particularly for Māori and for New Zealand Sign Language, which is pretty shocking because there are, national official languages. But I don't think that that's ever going to be redressed until we start focusing on languages and start making them a priority in our schools. I do think that Māori should be a compulsory part of education. And probably sign language as well, but I'm a little bit biased in that because I took a paper in it last year and it's just amazing. So much fun to learn, very interesting language. And finally, for the third part of the question, is it right to learn another language and about another culture without first learning about your own? My answer would be that I don't think that learning is linear like that. And so that when you start learning another language and learning about another culture, then it helps you understand your own better. And so, yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Oh, is this how we're going to do it? We're just going to pass along the line?
Yeah, there is another mic here. I think it'll evolve into a discussion.
Okay.
But
Cool. I guess I'll try and keep this brief. Kia ora, everyone. Michael, obviously. I think there's a lot to discuss here, and this question just by itself could, devolve into so many different things. But I guess the key points that I would like to raise regarding this is, that first sentence is obviously just a statement, and I couldn't agree more. So, language is key to understanding people from different countries, cultures, and ethnicities. But once you get into the question of, which second language should people learn, and is it right to learn about another language and another culture without learning your own? I think it really is that point you raised about identity. Identity is the key thing. When you say without first learning about your own, whose are you talking about? In New Zealand, we're obviously a very diverse culture, and we're a diverse nation. And the next question raises the point that we're an immigrant nation, which is obviously very true. And so the question is should we not be doing as much as we can to encourage people to pursue their own identities and their own languages, no matter where they come from. And in that case, should we not try and do as much as possible to make as many languages as possible available? I'd challenge Sonia on the idea that there aren't enough language teachers available. As a non-working or not working as a Japanese teacher, I'd say that probably curriculum needs to lead in that area. At the moment, there isn't such a push from the very top around learning languages, and I think if there was more emphasis put in the curriculum on learning languages, then we'd maybe get a little bit further in terms of developing that. I also think there's a massive place for Te Ao Māori and Te Reo in New Zealand, and we're probably not doing enough with that either. So it's a really challenging question, and it's difficult to know what the first step to take is, but there are lots of potential options, and we just kind of need to work that out, I guess. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Hello, and I'm Nasra. So in terms of language is very important, and it is very important. I mean, we would not be here today. We would just be looking at each other like, hello. So we need language in that sense. It's everyday use, and I highly agree with the statement that schools and universities or whatever, certain languages should be compulsory in everyday education. And in New Zealand, yes, I think Maori language should be very compulsory, should be encouraged for everybody to learn the Maori language. And also there are so many other languages in New Zealand, and I think those other languages need to be understood, and they need to be respected, and they need to be encouraged and young New Zealanders who might not know other languages to understand at least some of them, or their and where they came from, how it was adapted. Personally, English is my fourth language, so it was easy for me to learn in that sense, because I feel like I learned other languages and it was just easy to follow when teachers were telling me, oh, this is how you use a sentence, or this is how you put sentences together. I did that, before. So I think it opens doors, and it allows, if you know one language and if you know another one, it allows you to learn more and more. It will be easier and easier. And I think languages, it's something that will go on forever, and will something that we will carry on. And this world that we're living in, which is so fast and diverse, we need to have those different understandings and different share different ways of communicating, because every day is a communication, so we need that. The second part of the question is that we, for example, and high schools, they need to ask the students what language, just not force one language, and what languages are you interested in, Maybe my sister, she's here today. Hi. She's embarrassed a bit. And if she wants to learn Chinese, she can just go and enroll. There should not be no limitation to her learning Chinese, for example. So I think we should encourage those. So that's all I have to say, but I'm sure we will come back to more of this question. Thank you.
Thank you. Kia ora. So I think this is something that everyone has touched on, and that language can be a real force for connections between different communities and people from different ethnicities. And I think that's really the power of language, and being able to have a second language in schools, I think is very important to do that. Also, in order to tackle, say, misconceptions, at the moment we are having a conversation as a country about, Māori, having a discussion about the treaty. And I think having language in schools where you're actually talking about things like the Māori language and tikanga Māori would actually help to really tackle this issue in a much broader way, and actually open up that conversation about what is the place of Māori in New Zealand. They were the first people here, and so our discussion should be around that. And I think what that does is open up the conversation to who are we in connection to that, and how we are all connected. Say, for example, there are lots of misconceptions at the moment around Islam and the Arab world as well. So being able to have a conversation about, is that a language that perhaps we should be studying in schools as well, whether or not we should be looking at the Arabic language, or, for example, we should be looking at Hindi, looking at the demographic of New Zealand, how many people do we have here? Same thing with the language, Chinese language as well, being able to open that up and say, actually, all of these different languages, they connect us and actually help us to understand each other a lot more, and to actually combat misconceptions of different cultures. And so the last one was, is it right to learn another language and about another culture without first learning about your own? For me, this is quite a loaded question, just given my background as well. So I was born in Fiji. So I am Fijian Indian in terms of my ethnicity. When I was 4 years old, I came to New Zealand, and then after that we actually left to go to Asia. So I was in Asia for about 8 years, primarily Malaysia and Singapore. And then I've been back here to study in high school and university. So just looking at that, I've sort of lived and travelled and been quite a global citizen for a very long time. And so for me, the issue as well, actually, why is this actually of concern? I am not someone who first learnt about my own culture. It was only when I came to New Zealand and sort of saw the free and frank conversations that we're having as a country that I felt that I could explore my own identity. And I think if in high school we had had the opportunity to study Māori and to study tikanga, I think that would have helped me with my own journey of identity, because actually, if I think about my culture and if I think about my language, there's so much connection in that, in concepts like whānau, like whakapapa, like marae. All of those things I understand in connection to my own culture. And so I think it would have helped me in that journey of trying to figure out who I am, where I come from, and where I'm going. But now as a country, now that we're having that conversation, I find it very helpful, because I still struggle with identity even at this tender age. And so I think it's really helpful to be able to talk about actually introducing all of these languages in school and helping us as a country, because if you look around like you've said before, we are an immigrant country. So I think having a second language or multiple languages available in school is only going to help bring us closer together as a country, regardless of what our background might be or where we have come from.
Kia ora tātou. Tuatahi rā e mihi ana ki a koe. E kura, anau I whakatau I a tātou ki roto I tēnei o ngā whare, o tira ki roto I tēnei o ngā takiwa o te whanganui atara. Nō reira e tika ana kia mihi ki a koe, o tira ki a tātou katoa. E ngā mate huhua o te wā, e whakaro ana ki te wā I Korero koe, mō tā henare rā. E mōhio wana e takoto tiraha mai rā tētahi ki ona marae o mota tau. Tērā o aku whanaunga no reira ka mihi. O tira ki te kaupapa, kua whakararau mai nei I a tātou I tēnei wā, ka nui te mihi. Kia ora everybody, my name is Haimona Waititi. I hail from the most eastern part of the Eastern Bay of Plenty, small little place called Te Kaha. Not too sure if anyone has been there. Yeah. If you've watched the movie Boy, then you've been there. Well done. So yeah, come from a small community where probably around 90% or 90, close to 100% of those that reside there are Māori, and Māori is the dominant language spoken there. So probably similar to a lot of my fellow panelists, English is my second language. And yeah, I think when I consider this question, I'd rather not. I'd like this to be just normal place that every child in this country, at a minimum, has two languages that they have at their disposal. And in terms of this question, I feel there's two parts to it. There's language that you can acquire by just learning it. But if we're talking about nationhood and how we're building this nation in a progressive kind of way, then I don't think the Māori language can be a void of those conversations, because it's interwoven into the fabric of this country. And I feel that, from the get-go, I feel that, it should be, I'd like this conversation to progress to a level where, we're not having these conversations and that it's just commonplace. So those are just my initial thoughts at this stage. Thank you.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name's Alicia Shao. So while quite a few of our panelists feel quite strongly about having second language as a compulsory curriculum at school, I feel quite strongly about the opposite. Personally, I think learning a second language shouldn't be compulsory at school, mainly because we should encourage our students and our children to develop their own interests, because it's very difficult for us to say that languages is more important than science or than maths. While I strongly agree that languages are very important, I think the best way for people to learn a language is to actually have that interest, because if you're not interested in the language, then you wouldn't really be engaging in class when you're being forced into, say, a French class, a Chinese class, or any other languages. Personally, for me, it's quite important to have role models within a community who can speak multiple languages. And through these role models, maybe they have experiences living overseas, or maybe through the experiences of trade, cultural experiences, like for example, Jet. Through this type of activity, we encourage young people to learn languages, because there's no point in forcing it onto them, because for them it will be another subject that I'm forced to do. I'm not interested. Why are you making me do this, adults? So that's the first question. And second question about how we decide which languages are available. While New Zealand being quite a small nation, we do have limited resources, but outside of the resources that the schools provide, we do have, for example, quite a few embassies that have, say, film festivals or language classes that encourage people to go to. And at the same time, in the 21st century, we really should embrace modern technology. There are quite a few free resources out there on the internet or apps that really have great resources, so that learning languages shouldn't be a barrier for us anymore. And I think for young people, we can't say that the school that offered this language to me, I'm missing out so much. That's no longer an excuse for us. So lastly, I believe that even if you're not fully aware of your own culture, if you take the initiative to learn a different culture, you often learn more about yourself. You'll find the similarities and differences, and that helps you learn 2, 3, or 4 cultures at the same time, and it's a great thing. Thank you.
Cool. So, thank you all. I suppose one of the things that came through, it seemed, Alicia, you touched on getting people interested in languages. The rest of the panel seemed to say that they felt as though it was important, but what languages people did learn, might be determined by different means. So there was demographics touched on by you, Michael, I think. Sonia, you said there were 3 national languages. Haimona, you touched on the idea of nationhood and what that means. There's also, I suppose, commerce sitting there. What do you feel as though sort of the main drivers for what languages should be learned in school are? And for you, Alicia, what do you feel that the main drivers in terms of getting people interested in languages are?
Personally?
Yeah.
Okay.
How do you get people interested in
Slightly
languages?
embarrassed to admit this, but I'm a massive foodie. So food and different cuisines actually really drive my interest in learning a language.
Yeah.
So I came to New Zealand when I was 4 years old, so my whole family immigrated here. I did English and Chinese at the same time, and then eventually I picked up French because I loved croissants and pain au chocolat. And eventually I started learning Japanese as well because I really enjoy Japanese food too. So personally for me, it's actually the experience I can get from traveling in a different country, the type of people I will meet, and kind of also the history that a country can offer that really drives me to learn what language I want to do. And I think all the countries around the world, they have lots of different cultures, history, and beautiful architecture. Say this is actually something that we're lacking in New Zealand because we're so young. Whereas for me, when I travel to another country, I really want to explore the languages. I want to learn about their culture. And if you don't pick up some language on the way, it's actually quite difficult for you to understand the culture fully.
So, Nazra, that might touch on your point of asking people what languages they want to learn, and maybe students would say, I really like pain au chocolat and I want to learn French. What for you should be the driver? Do you feel as though if you opened it up to a classroom and asked them what languages they wanted to learn, is that the best way, I suppose, to promote language in New Zealand? And is that sort of, is New Zealand going to be reach its greatest potential, I suppose, culturally through that approach?
I think, I definitely agree. If you are interested in a subject, then you, for example, I'm a huge film nerd. I love movies. I love understanding movies, and I've been watching a lot of international movies. So if I watch a French film or like a Nigerian film, I want to learn their language because I want to understand what they're saying. So I understand the tongues and their way of bringing sentences together, their way of like how this family dynamic works. Like, do they have the same sense of humor as Somalis, for example, have, or English? How does that work? So if I understand that language, then I would be able to understand that TV show or that movie more. You know, that's what goes into my head, and I think that's. And if you go into a classroom and if you ask the students, what language do you want to learn? They would look at themselves and say, what do I enjoy in my life? What areas am I interested in? What drives me? You know, what am I trying to get out of this language if I learn it? So I think we have to ask people why, you know. And I think that we can do surveys of people who speak more than a few languages and say, why did you learn this language? And bring them to schools and let them speak to the young people and give them examples of saying, oh, I want to learn a language, and their process of getting to that language and learning it, and what they want that language to provide for their life, in the future and now. I think that's what I think.
So, and how does that tie in with your concepts around national languages, Sonia? Do you feel as though learning these other languages might be at the expense of preserving sort of these national languages?
I don't think that learning a language should ever be at the expense of something else. Is this one not working? Okay. I think what everyone else seems to be thinking about is languages in the high schools and universities. Whereas the way I think about compulsory language in schools is what I'd like to see is for bilingualism to become normalised. And I think my problem with the free choice kind of thing that a couple of you guys have been saying is that I'm 23 and I still can't make intelligent decisions about what I want to learn. And I think that it would be very helpful for New Zealand children to be exposed to languages before they're old enough to be able to make decisions about what they're interested in, so that they grow up with that sort of... also because language acquisition is much easier for younger children. They pick up languages much, much faster than someone who cogently goes out and decides to learn a language. So I, for one, am very grateful that I grew up in a school where Māori words were kind of just tossed out randomly, and they were integrated into our everyday lives, and that just made it so much more normal. I think I've gone a little bit off topic there, but I think that kind of just mass exposure can never be a detriment to anyone. Yep.
So, and your sort of, you touched on the two different types of language, I suppose, Haimona, and one that you learn, the other that contributes towards nationhood is something that and something that we hold strong in our national identity, I suppose. How does it sit with you, knowing that Te Reo's sitting there, but if we had people in school saying learn whatever languages you want, do you think that Te Reo would suffer as a result of that, or do you feel as though we hold it strongly enough in our identity that people would learn it and it would continue to thrive?
Good question. I think Te Reo would not suffer. It's a language, and I'm very pro people having the choice to choose what they may or may not want to learn. What I do think will suffer is this country if it's not given the respect or the place where it should be. And yeah, I think that's my opinion on it. I think it's integral in terms of us building this country well. And I guess the leaders of this country have a choice whether or not they put in place, things to help our country progress that way or not. But the language, Te Reo Māori, will not suffer. It's been on the brink of being lost before, but through the efforts of some valiant people in the past, and definitely I've been a beneficiary of their efforts to bring Te Reo Māori back from the brink of extinction. The language will not ever see that state again. But yeah, I think the question's more around, where does it fit in the in this mat that we call our nation, and I think that's the discussion that needs to be had.
And I suppose, and Michael, perhaps going back to you as somebody who had thoughts on demographics, perhaps driving what languages we learn. Do you have any comments to make, sort of expanding on that, or in response to the other panelists?
Okay. I'll just think for a minute, and then, I think it's, in terms of, Marcus, what you're talking about, I guess, the drivers around like what languages should we be learning. I think there's maybe one driver in that identity or nationhood idea that's been talked about already, and the other driver is probably around usefulness in terms of either personally or professionally. So in my own experience, so I picked up Japanese when I was at high school because I had to. There was a compulsory option subject during year 9 when you went to school, and I had 3 choices, and I chose Japanese. And from that, so I guess it began with a personal interest in this different history or culture, different to my own or my country's, and that had that developed. And by the time I got to university, I was taking Japanese because I thought it would help me get a better job, to be honest. And I suppose when you think about the languages that are offered in schools now, I guess particularly the discussion, there's a lot of discourse around we should have more New Zealanders learning Chinese so that when we do business with China, we're going to be more effective because we understand the language and the culture. And I think historically that's maybe also why Japanese has been encouraged in schools, and that is changing all the time. And so, I think it's interesting in that there are lots of different influences on sort of like what languages people want to learn, but also what languages people are being encouraged to learn. I think both that idea of like how useful is the language, but also how does the language contribute to New Zealand's identity, and how is New Zealand identity changing over time? It's a very dynamic thing that will keep changing, I think, is challenging. Yeah.
Cool. And that probably segues into the next question, which is, I suppose, recognises the fact that New Zealand is an immigrant nation and is drastically changing, is becoming more dynamic, more diverse. And I think interesting, you say one thing that makes, or people turn to, I suppose, as making New Zealand different is sort of the Māori culture. What we've sort of heard is that people should have the choice to speak whatever language they want, perhaps, that there are other drivers, and that maybe te reo, isn't compulsory. So what is it to the panel that we feel makes New Zealand, or being a young person in New Zealand, different to elsewhere? And deep down, are we really that dissimilar?
Okay. Well, it's going to sound corny, but I think that being a New Zealander is pretty much just a frame of mind. I think that there are so many different ways that you could try and define what it means to be a Kiwi that no one's ever going to agree. And I think fundamentally what it comes down to is, do you see yourself as a New Zealander? Do you see yourself belonging in New Zealand or being a part of New Zealand as a whole, or New Zealand culture? And so I imagine like everyone will see that in their own slightly different ways, but it's just the frame of mind. As to the second part of the question, how is being a young Kiwi different from being a young person elsewhere? Obviously there are, as you pointed out in the question, a lot of surface differences, the sort of lifestyles that we lead. But I think that my answer would be no, it's not particularly different. And I think part of the reason that I say that is one of the activities that I did through the Victoria International Leadership Program was called Conversation Classes, which was basically just an hour a week chatting to students for whom English was their second language. And one of the things I learned, I did this for about 18 months, I think. One of the things that I really noticed is that despite all of the other students coming from all different parts of the world and stuff, the one thing that's quite unifying is our experiences and our attitudes. So yeah, like we all have so many things in common without even having things in common.
And opening that up, to the rest of the panel. Nazra, do you have any thoughts on, I suppose recently coming here in 2007, sort of what, the experience that you've had since you've arrived, I suppose, what it means to be young in New Zealand. What reflections have you got on that? Do you feel as though it is that dissimilar to, in light of your experience?
I think yes, and being from a different background, having a different, and definitely a totally different life back home, and also my religion is different to a lot of the people in New Zealand, and it was quite quite a challenge. To this day, still there's a lot of things that I have to learn, in terms of being a New Zealander and adjusting to this culture and understanding how New Zealand works. For example, back home, you as a young person, you're kind of told to stay back, you listen to the adults. Whereas New Zealand, I think young people kind of have a bit more voice, even though still not as much as the adults, but they still have some identity. They can still contribute to New Zealand society in that sense. And for example, the recent election, we saw that a lot of young people took part in that, and which was amazing. And for me, personally, it was really interesting to be a part of the election and also see a young person be in Parliament now. So I think in that sense, yes, it is quite different from my experience and previous to coming to New Zealand. But and being in New Zealand for the past 11 years and has definitely changed me. I learned a lot about myself and about my culture, and being here forces you to learn a bit more about your culture. Because in Somalia, for example, you are surrounded by people who are the same as you every day, but here you are surrounded by people who are so different from you. So you kind of cling to your culture and your identity in some ways, but also it allows you to be open-minded and learn about other people's culture. And for example, in my circle of friends, we about 20, and we're all from different parts of the world. And I have so many different things that I can say about, for example, India, because my friends from India, and I know a lot about there. So, it's quite different, but also it allows you to learn a lot about yourself and a lot about New Zealand. And if, for example, you have to find ways you can contribute, to New Zealand culture. And I think that's something that drives me, is how am I going to contribute to this country? And how am I going to, for example, empower young people in my community and also wider community in New Zealand? That's what I think.
And Pakiza, you mentioned that you'd live in and around Asia for 8 years, having come from the Pacific. How do you feel New Zealand, or do you feel as though your experiences in New Zealand is different to those countries?
Thank you. Sorry, could you repeat that question again? That's just that last bit.
How's your experience in New Zealand different to what it was in some of the other countries you've lived in?
I suppose what is different here in New Zealand, and what I take a great amount of pride in when I say that I am a New Zealander, is that connection that we inherently have with the land and the respect that we have for Māori. And we're only, I think, sort of breaking through that point right now because we're still having that discussion, and I think that we actually need to be building on that. We've started that, but we're not quite there yet. And so coming back to this question about, you know, how does that one determine the nature of being a New Zealander, or what is a New Zealander? And for me, it's that connection is what is inherently being a New Zealander. So we've had this conversation about language, and I think I feel a little bit more strongly than perhaps everybody else at the table, where I actually do think that Māori should be a compulsory language. And by doing that, we will feel a greater sense of connection to this land going forward and have that level of respect, like my panellists said, in terms of the nationhood, in terms of our identity, where do we place that? And I think that we really need to place that a lot higher than we are at the moment. And that is that's what I think about New Zealand when I think about what is a New Zealander and how that differs from all of the other places that I've lived in, that sense of connection that we have. I've never really seen that in any other country. And if you look around the world in terms of Australia and how they treat their First Peoples, I mean, if you look at Canada and the way that they treat theirs, if you look at America and the way that they're treating their natives, you know, I think we need to have that conversation in our country and say, actually, we've started to take steps in the right direction, but we're not quite there yet. And that needs to be a sense of pride for us, that we get to a level where we can tell the rest of the world, this is how we are living, and this is what makes us New Zealanders, because we are full of respect and aroha.
And I'll ask, I'm under the same question. I'm working with rangatahi, I suppose, daily and involved in an initiative that is about development, is about probably those connections. What sort of messages are you giving to the rangatahi? What is it that you're trying to convey to them about what it is to be a New Zealander, I suppose, and that journey that they're going on?
I think it's a lot easier for us because obviously the blood that runs through their veins are the blood that is from their ancestors who first landed here on this island, on these islands. So in terms of the messages that we convey to our young people is that they are inherently great, and no one should tell them otherwise, despite all the statistics or the socio-economic things that are kind of being blasted out in media and all of those kind of things, which to me are lies, but that our kids come from greatness and they should know that up, down, in, out and around and round. Their connection to this land is unique and no one else has that connection. Their mountains, their rivers are all part of them. So I think the messages that we convey to our young people is that is really giving them permission, because for so long they haven't been given permission to be great. So that's what we try and do. And I think in terms of this question around, I definitely agree with Sonia. In this day and age, we have a very connected world where we can have shared experiences across the world. But I think the difference in terms of coming from New Zealand is the lens that we see the world through. So, and probably a lot of us here on this panel have experienced the same thing but see it in different ways. So I think in essence that's part of our uniqueness. So like even for myself, and no offense to the organisers of this, but this is quite a weird thing for me to be in, sitting here at a table looking at you all and getting asked these questions and in this kind of way. Whereas if this was me running this, it would be done in a kind of different way, because that's just my worldview and how I see the world. So yeah, I think those are some of the differences.
And Alicia, how about yourself being involved with, I suppose, the Asian New Zealand network, among other things, taking young people across to China sort of providing some insight on what it is to be a New Zealander in a globalised world, I suppose, that you're heavily embracing.
So I'll probably start from my personal experience. From an outside point of view, as in people from other countries, when they look at New Zealand, they'll be like, oh yeah, I know all about New Zealand, Lord of the Rings, All Blacks, the haka. This is what I experienced when I was overseas, when I did my exchange in France. But then, personally, for me, when I was in France, the experience I got where I felt very strongly about this New Zealand culture was actually from quite a few of our cultural symbols. So, for example, walking down the road in a country in Europe, and you hear that accent that's so familiar that you haven't heard of for such a long time, and you feel that warm, fuzzy feeling that feels like a bit like home. That is one of the cultural symbols that we can claim, our beautiful accent. Another thing that some may agree, some may disagree. And another big cultural symbol that I really felt for was our flat white coffees. So personally for me, when I'm away from New Zealand, that is actually one of the things that I miss the most, being able to have a good cup of flat white coffee in the morning. Luckily, in the city that I was in, Lyon, they had a small Kiwi cafe run by some Kiwis. So I think when we talk about what is the nature of being a New Zealander, we have to look at the broader picture, the cultural implications that's included, and also when you see certain things or hear certain things, if you feel like you've got the sense of home, you're a New Zealander. And in terms of about being a young New Zealander in New Zealand and a young New Zealander overseas, so with our youth tour that's coming up this year, we want to help our young Wellingtonians build that cultural identity of being a New Zealander and having the opportunity to go over to China and visit high schools in China, universities in China, New Zealand business people in China, and the embassy in China as well, just to help them understand and help them form what is the definition of being a New Zealander. And for them, being over in a different country, talking to other people, that's probably going to help them form their own identity as well.
Thank you all. I think I'm just conscious of time, so we might finish off with just the final question. We might just get you to pose a couple of thoughts on that each, perhaps, and then I'll open it up to the floor to ask any questions that you may have or put forward any thoughts that you have. So, Alicia, perhaps starting with you, just a thought on, and then this is coming from a sister city's point of view, which is about international relationships for the promotion of peace and harmony. Is it possible to have a meaningful international relationship without an economic benefit needing to be derived from it?
I think yes, because with these international relationships and economic relationships, the ideal way to approach it, maybe the mayors will disagree with me and the embassies, is to first build that cultural understanding. Because once you build a cultural understanding, you know more about the other city, the industries they have. That is when you can start understanding what's the best mutually beneficial economic relationship you can have. Because before doing that, going through that stage of understanding each other, all you say is, I think this is the best things I can offer you, and they think they got the best thing that they can offer you. But in fact, you might be looking at something that they've personally ranked 7 or 8. But the fact that if you trade with them on the number 7 or number 8, it actually benefits the other city you're talking about. So I think, yes, you can have an international relationship without economic benefits, because the economic benefit is a flow-on effect coming from that relationship.
Do you have any thoughts, Maimona?
Yep. Yeah, I think the approach to relationships and this, I think the way that the question is shaped is interesting, because it's inferring that, most of the relationships are based on economic gain or benefit. I think there are well, the way that I view relationships is purely on a value-based type of relationship. If there's alignment in values, if there's an alignment in kind of beliefs, then I think that's the best thing to base your relationship on. Because if it's based on resources, resources always run out. So then what are you left with? So I definitely think if it's a value-based relationship, then the possibilities are quite endless. Because talking about resources, once that's established, comes a lot easier. Talking about other opportunities that may pop out of it comes a lot easier. And you're given a lot more freedom, I guess, because you've got an accountable relationship. If you do something wrong and they tell you, you don't get feelings because you've established that groundwork to be able to work through those things well. So yeah, this is just my piece.
So I suppose similarly to the other two that have spoken before me, I think it is possible to have meaningful international relationships without an economic benefit needing to be derived. But I think it's going to be very difficult because, let's be honest, the conversations that we have as a country are very much what is the economic benefit I can derive from a relationship with China? What is the economic benefit I can derive from the Māori economy? What's the benefit that I can derive through, for example, Japan? Looking at the languages, I think one of the panelists mentioned that, you know, the reason why we studied Japan previously was because they were a trading partner. The reason that we are encouraging people to study Chinese at the moment is because they are a trading partner. So, I mean, that's kind of how our relationships have really been formed and viewed as a country for so long that I think it will be difficult to change that conversation and say, let's have relationships for the sake of relationships because we place a value on relationship beyond it just being an economic value. So, I mean, I am hopeful that it is possible. I don't really have a solution as to how we would really do that. Having now worked in the private sector and the public sector, it's a mindset that is, you know, it's locked in at the moment, that is how we view things. So, yeah, I'm just going to say yes, I'm very hopeful that it is possible, but I'm not quite sure how we would get there. So if anyone on the panel has any thoughts out there, please feel free to share.
I think I might have something. And I think we definitely need more organizations like this who value relationships before anything else. And ways of doing that is like pushing the young people to get in touch with other young people around the world. And because if we kind of, I think it's a long shot, but if we enforce that, or young people that together talk about things that are, you know, besides tournaments or money or whatever, but lot of friendships, lot of relationships, lot of and building partnerships, whether if it's just talking few hours a week or something over the phone, just having a normal everyday friendship with someone else, and allowing organizations to fund those type of activities where other people can get in touch with each other and people can have meaningful relationships, run activities for younger people, not even for teenagers, but you know, children in primary schools. Start from the ground up, the ground down, and just for us to all have shared relationships and shared goals, and I think that's a way we can do. But yeah, it's a long shot, and we just hope for the best.
I think we need to make a really concerted effort.
Yeah, I guess I'd agree in principle that it's possible to have meaningful international relationships without an economic benefit needing to be derived from it, and I think it already does happen in terms of there's so much to be gained on a personal level, like international relationships. Obviously, in this context, we're thinking about sister cities, but individuals making connections in other countries, there's plenty to be gained from that, and there's also plenty to be gained from, I guess, talking to or sharing experiences with like people in countries that might have been through something similar or different to you, and I don't necessarily think that economic benefit has to be the driver behind the international relationships. I think it's, maybe also important to keep in mind that, like while it's slow, there is a gradual changing of mindset around what economic benefit is, I think. I think traditionally, you've maybe thought about economic benefit in terms of trade or increasing real GDP or how do we make more goods and services. But more and more, like Treasury, for example, now use the living standards framework when they're thinking about whether a policy is suitable. And so I think shifting our mindset to think, what are we doing to improve our standard of living? And that doesn't necessarily have to be by having more trade or having more goods and services. I think if we can think a little bit more in that context, then having those international relationships can definitely work to improve New Zealanders' standard of living and experiences overall, I think. Yeah.
Okay, well, that was very well said. I think I agree with everyone on this point. It's absolutely possible to have meaningful relationships without economic benefit. I think the question makes a lot of sense because, like, historically and politically, that is why we have international relationships. And I agree that it is still very much a focus of the way that we talk about our international relationships. But I feel very confident that it is possible to have those relationships without it, because I imagine that if we were to cut all economic ties with Australia tomorrow, then, I mean, New Zealanders would still feel a connection with Australia. I mean, that's still very important to us because it's a cultural, social kind of connection. And I can think of thousands of examples of this, and think of all the Commonwealth countries and Britain and how if we were to cut ties economically with Britain, a large sector of the population, a lot of Kiwis would still feel that we have an important relationship with Britain that goes beyond trade. And there are tons of other examples based on cultural or religious or historical grounds. And I would also highlight the very fact that we have a United Nations and particularly the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change happening in Bonn at the moment. Obviously, there's a little bit of self-preservation in participating in something like that, but it's not about economic relationships. It's about participating in a global community, and I think that that's really hopeful.
Thank you. It's nice to hear the optimism, but also the challenges that you put forward, so thank you. Opening it up to the floor, are there any questions that you would like to pose to the panel, or any... We'll just start.
Hi, I'm Radhika. I had a quick question for the panel. So this is in regards to the first topic we were talking about languages and how we should set what languages are available. This is kind of open to everyone, really. So would you say that it's more important to learn a language from, for example, emerging economies such as the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India and China for our high school and university students, just because they're going to be our future leaders and they're going to sort of run our economy, make relationships, create relationships? And I'm not saying that other languages are less important, but looking at New Zealand growing, do you think that it's more important to learn those sort of languages, for example, Mandarin or Hindi, rather than other languages, just for the overall well-being and growth of New Zealand?
Sure, I'll go first. So I get where you're coming from. It's a great question, and it makes a lot of sense. We talk about the new lingua franca of trade as being Mandarin and all that sort of thing. There's obviously a benefit there. The way I see it is that's quite a utilitarian point of view to take. I think this is talking about maximising benefit for New Zealand. And what my response would be to say that learning any language is going to be of benefit to New Zealand, to have people who are capable of learning languages. And besides, once you've learned one language, it's a lot easier to learn more. I think that it would be important to prioritise certain languages in the teaching in New Zealand. I I think that if you went to primary school learning Māori and had Māori as your second language, then from there you're already bilingual, and it's a lot easier to then teach yourself the languages of trade. Yeah. Anyone else?
Yeah, no, I guess I just agree with that in terms of, any second language, I think as a starting point, or considering like where we're at now, any second language is much better than feeling like we need to learn certain languages. Yeah, I think maybe further on, like you can have a discussion about what languages like should we maybe be prioritizing, but I think at the moment, yeah, it's pretty tricky to say.
Are there any other thoughts on that in the panel, or?
I think from a career prospect point of view, if you're focusing on the career, yeah, go for the languages that will get you a job. But from a self-interest point of view, go for what you're interested in. So personally, because I speak both English and Chinese, and I have actually found being able to speak Chinese very useful in the workforce, and it's actually that extra skill that some of my peers don't have.
And Ray, did you have a...
Just really a quick question for Nazra. I was just amazed when you said that English was your fourth language. What age group, do you mind me asking, when you first started learning different languages?
Okay, so I learned at birth, I learned my mother language and Somali. And when you are about 4 or 5, you have to learn Arabic. So because the Quran, our version of the Bible is written in Arabic. So in a religious aspect, we have to learn the Quran. So we after school we would attend a religious school where we learn Arabic, and so that was my second language. But with that one, I don't speak it, but I understand it, and it's easier for me when I'm reading the Quran. And then when I was 10, we moved to Ethiopia, and so we come here because they don't have the Red Cross embassy in Somalia. We had to go to Ethiopia. We had to learn the Ethiopian language, Amharic. So my mom was very smart. She said that you're not going to be sitting at home for months. So she shut us in school. So in school we were forced to learn Amharic very fast, and it was a very easy language to learn. So from 10 to 13, I had to learn Arabic, and I was fluent in it. I knew every aspect of it. And then when I was 13, I came here, and then I had to learn English fast because we had to go to school the first week we started to New Zealand, and that was very challenging because we were put in the ESOL department. Some of you might know where we learn English, and it took forever, 5 years to kind of leave the ESOL behind, because even now I'm still learning English. My English is still limited. So I started learning my second language in an early age. So it was easy for me when I moved to Ethiopia for me and my sister to pick up another language very easily, because we already knew that there's something else other than Somali. There's another way of understanding a language. There's another method. And my parents have been very encouraging us, of forcing us to learn other languages and giving us that encouragement of learning other languages. And so I've learned at the early.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think certainly from what I've heard there, it just shows how empowering it is for our young people as well, to be able to learn them, but also to be able to speak those languages. And I think, I understand what you're saying about, you've got to have a passion for it, so maybe not compulsory. Personally, I think Māori, we are very much proud of our Maori heritage and kaupapa. Someone that came to New Zealand as a small boy from Scotland, I'm still very proud of my heritage, my Scottish heritage, but I'm very proud to be a New Zealander, and I identify with, the Tangata Whenua, and so I think that's really important. So well done to you all. Fantastic.
Thank you, Ray. We might have time, possibly for one other quick question, if there is one. All right. I think the panel will, or there's networking and drinks following. So any other thoughts or questions, there might be an opportunity to ask then. But from us again to the panel, thank you so much for your insights. I think it's fascinating to hear, in light of your experience, what it is to be a New Zealander, what, the importance of language, what languages, how that feeds into the idea of nationhood. There's a really big questions and huge issues, but I think sort of left with a degree of optimism. I think Sister Cities and its purpose, from what you've said, is important, or more important now than ever. And I suppose from tonight I'll probably hold on to the fact that you all believe there's an inherent value on building relationships, for the inherent value of having a relationship, rather than necessarily going straight to those economic benefits, which we do hear a lot about. So thank you all. Raywin just has a small token of our appreciation.
I have a bag of treats in a JET program bag. So these are gifts that we spent some time discussing. We appreciate that the people on the panel are people of the world and probably don't want a lot of stuff. So we've given some money on behalf of each of you to Paper for Trees, which takes paper and turns it into trees. And we've also got a block of chocolate for you, because everybody likes chocolate, we believe. While I'm handing out those gifts, if Ray would like to say a few closing remarks, that would be fabulous, and then we'll crack into the networking.
Well, I would just like to take the mayoral hat off, just acknowledging Mayor Mike. Good to have you here, mate, from Korero. But my other hat now as Vice President of Sister Cities, and on behalf of Hiromi, our President, members of the board, I too also just want to pass on our sincere thanks to the panellists. I think this has been really thought-provoking, and I am absolutely blown away with the knowledge, the skill that you all have, the depth that you bring. And I am excited, I think, as Marcus rightly said, not only the optimism that you all bring, but that diversity. And I think that's the great thing about New Zealand. We celebrate that so well, acknowledging the rightful place of Tangata Whenua, but the diversity that so many of us have and that you bring. So I think New Zealand's future is an extremely bright one. I hope that we can do this again sometime. I think that these types of events, particularly from our young people, really give us opportunity for the future. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us. It's wonderful to have you here. To the other members of the diplomatic corps, to Wen, Alan and the team, thank you to the Office of Ethnic Communities for sponsoring tonight in conjunction with Sister Cities New Zealand. I'm sure that you will also be very pleased and excited to see the diversity that New Zealand is becoming, and as it said there, the super diverse country. And I think that we've got something all to be proud of. Just a little bit of a plug. It was interesting talking about the relationships. Lower Hutt have two very, very strong relationships. First with Tempe in Arizona, coming up to 40 years, and our second Mino in Osaka, Japan, coming up to 22 years. Both of those have been built on and continue to be relationships of friendship, understanding and trust. While in more recent years we've maybe talked a little bit about the economics, because as Mayor Mike would know, that's something that ratepayers expect us to do. What is the benefit to the ratepayers of this sister city relationship? But our relationships have been so strong, and they have been built on trust. And in particular, Tempe, that's coming up for 20 years. Every year we send 4 students over, and they bring 4 students back. The community do the fundraising. It's not funded by council. The kids do the fundraising. And 40 years on, those relationships are still going strong. So it's very much relationships that can happen without any real economic benefit, because there isn't, for those relationships, too much of the economic benefit. It's about the culture, it's about the friendship and building those relationships. So on that note, I would like to invite you all to next year's Sister City Conference in Lower Hutt, and it is going to be about sharing these ideas about sister cities, about the whole premise of promoting people-to-people exchanges, particularly next year through technology. So I hope a lot of you young people will be able to come, because you are the leaders, not only leaders now, but are going to be the leaders of our communities in the future. And the date is May the 24th to 26th, I think. Oh, and I'm getting some good instruction here. That's great. You see, there's all the workers. Just to extend a very warm welcome to each and every one of you on Sunday in Lower Hutt from 11 till 3. We have our very exciting Japan Day at the Douse in Langs Road. There is going to be some fantastic activity, taiko drummings, the traditional tea ceremonies, calligraphy, all sorts of wonderful things. And just as a bit of a bonus, come along, because we will be giving away 2 free Air New Zealand tickets to Osaka, Japan, for 2 very lucky people. So come along and be part of that. It's going to be a fantastic event. Putting on my other hat now as Vice President, Sister Cities, thank each and every one of you. Thank you for being here. I hope that you've got something from this. This is something that President Hiromi and the board have wanted and want to continue to do. So thank you. I hope that you'll be able to join us for a bit of refreshment and networking now next door. And I think that now formally brings, with a formal karakia, this part of tonight's proceedings to a close. Again, let's put our hands together for the wonderful panellists. Thank you.
Kia ora tatau. Ara tēnei o ki tāku taketake e rongo mārua watu wānau ai o irunga I te pua wakamaroro. A moa ke au I tāku toku ko te awi o rangi wai ōrua. I o ki kirunga, I o ki kiraro, I o ki te wai au ki te ao mārama. E rongo waka iri ia kirunga. Turu turu o uti waka maua kia tēnā hui e tāe ki e. Kia ora tatau.